Hello, everyone. This is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. This is secret email disclosure on alien craft. Yes, I received an interesting email. Before we get into it, I just want to mention Patreon. If you'd like to support the work of Astral Club, you can do so on Patreon. You get advanced episodes on Sunday. You get a library of downloaded episodes for your podcast app that you can listen to anywhere. And of course, you get the Patreon email where we can talk back and forth. And if you're interested, there is a link in the description. Next up, private lessons. If you'd like to have a lesson with me to learn to astral project, we can certainly talk about that. You'll find an email also in the description where you can just request info and then I'll send it to you. Something interesting happened. Now, I am recording this now on the 21st of June, which is Wednesday. And I'm going to be releasing my Wednesday episode today. And it's about not, avoiding getting caught on the lower astral. But on Saturday, I'm going to be releasing my podcast on the whole new disclosures that have been released by Grush, talking about these the alien craft that the U.S. have recovered, or craft of unknown origin, UAPs, whatever you want to call them, as well as allegedly bodies of that do not originate here on Earth. Have to be careful how we discuss this. And I'm going to be releasing that on this coming Saturday. Now, I have released it to my patrons. So they are the only ones who currently know that on this coming Saturday, I'm going to be releasing, well, it's going to be last Saturday for you guys listening here. But in other words, the only people who are aware that I've made this is myself and my patrons. But I received this email that came my personal email, and it somehow was aware that I had written, a podcast about these Grush alien or whatever releases, and they sent me this personal email backing up what this Grush guy says. So somehow they found out that I recorded this podcast app and that I was going to be releasing it. And then they went to the trouble to find my personal email address. The interesting thing about this, though, is that when I read through it, I took the extra precaution of copying and pasting it into my notes on my computer. Because when I went back to look at it sometime later, that email was gone. It had disappeared. So I'm glad that I was able to copy it. And so what I'd like to do is read this long email supporting these, these revelations, and to see what you think. I don't know any more than you do about the authorization or where this email comes from. It sounds like someone who understands the military, and they claim to have been in the Air Force as an officer for over 20 years as an aero engineer. And I didn't see anything in the email that screamed to me this is a person who doesn't know what they're talking about. But hey, all I can do is read it, and then you can make your own judgments. It starts with, as a current aero engineer and officer for the U.S. Air Force over 20 years, which means that they're at minimum, if they've been in that long as an officer, they're at least a major, but most probably a lieutenant colonel or a colonel. So somebody is certainly higher up there. And of course, there's also a chance that they're a general officer, but who knows? I can help you decode at least some of this. First, I know that Grush has only a limited ability to talk about this subject. He did get clearance to speak to a certain extent, but he must withhold quite a bit in order to avoid very serious law violations. So expect him to be holding back some things that he could say. And this also necessitates rephrasing on the fly the language that he would normally use. So when I watched the Grush news program and his revelations, I also watched some body language as experts and their comments on him, and they seemed to think that he was telling some truth, but he was also holding back, which makes sense to me, because if he was given limited clearance to talk about this stuff, he would have to be very careful about how he talks about it, and he would have to hold back to a certain degree. So that would make sense. Anyway, this person who sent me the email goes on. Secondly, this retrieval program is real and is the most highly classified program in the U.S. The program is called Zodiac, and this may or may not come out in the public hearing soon. Take this in when viewing this man's speech. He is trying to talk to us about the most highly classified project in the world. People have historically died, lost careers, lost family due to this secret. So this is a very stressful type of announcement. So the fact that perhaps these body language people detect a lot of stress in Grush. Normally, if you're talking about criminal defendants and that kind of stuff, that means they're lying. But in this particular case, yeah, it could mean a lie, but it could also mean that he's under a lot of pressure to keep certain things undisclosed or to perhaps alter things to some extent. So that would explain what some of these body language people were reporting. Thirdly, when he shook his head talking about spacecraft and alien, it's because we don't really think this is what they are. But this term is in common use publicly and is as close as we can describe the phenomena to the general public and be understood. These are much more than spacecraft. They are transmedium interdimensional craft to the best of our knowledge. Now, that is a mouthful. Transmedium or interdimensional craft. Well, transmedium simply means that the craft that they have uncovered can not only move through interstellar space, but it can also move within Earth's orbit, Earth's gravity, and underneath the ocean. So that is a transmedium craft. As far as, obviously there's a lot of temperature and radiation. They got to deal with micrometeorites and a wide variety of things. So these craft have to be tough, to say the least. As far as the alien aspect, apparently this individual says that the government believes that these are most likely beings that are advanced biological AI or manufactured beings. And when I think about the Greys, if this is indeed the race they're talking about, and their cloning process that they use, I would imagine that perhaps if we examine their bodies, we could very well think that they are manufactured beings. And perhaps they've developed this process to transfer intelligences and personalities into these bodies, and these bodies are manufactured. So I think that in a very definite way, they're accurate in what they think about these beings, at least as far as Earth science can possibly understand. He then goes on to say he can tell us from his own experience that while on duty he saw these craft and they are real. He says, "I can tell you this because I was present on 2 occasions when these craft were above our base watching us. He said he wasn't read into this program, so he can only tell us based on firsthand experience on these two occasions, and that they are real craft. So I don't know if these were under control of someone else or we were controlling them, but anyway, he saw these craft, and he can obviously can say that they are indeed real. He goes on to say that they can operate in the atmosphere without interacting with our atmosphere. In other words, they're able to go thousands of miles per hour with no friction. And he even goes on to try to make an example. I mean, imagine if you were in a car and you were going thousands of miles an hour, and you put your fingers outside like you do when you're going in a car going 70 miles an hour when you're a kid. You would normally create a fireball on your fingers if you were going thousands of miles an hour. But apparently the craft, it doesn't interact with our atmosphere in that way. They know these craft, he goes on to say that they have their own gravity field, because they can instantly accelerate, stop, and make 90-degree turns without any inertial effects. Obviously, if gravity or inertia were to be having an effect on it, then they would tear the craft apart. The occupants would be dead far earlier than anything else. He goes on to say that we have seen these craft go straight down from the upper atmosphere right into the ocean with no problem. So they seem to be phased out of our physical dimension in some way, because they don't immediately crash or explode when they do this. You know, when you crash into the ocean going at high speed, if we tried that with one of our craft, there would be a major mess. Furthermore, they then proceed to move at unbelievably high speeds underwater, which of course is much more dense than our atmosphere. Lastly, and I can attest to this, there are no discernible flight control surfaces on these craft, which are typically, not in all cases, either disc shape, cube, or a sphere. I know when I saw the inside of one of the craft a couple different times, I didn't see any obvious buttons, levers, stick shifts, anything like that. And what I was told previously is that the Greys control their craft through a type of telepathy. So you wouldn't see, knobs and buttons and all the rest of that kind of stuff, because it's not necessary for them to control the craft. The next thing he talks about is we are not tracking. He says they appear interdimensionally. In other words, they're not. We don't track them from space coming all the way to Earth. What happens is they seem to just appear, and I know from the way that they travel, the Greys at least travel interstellarly, is that they're basically traveling through dimensions. So to us, it would appear that suddenly a large craft would appear above the Earth. Let's say they weren't properly shielded, which they normally are. But if we were able to track them, and if we did track them, we would suddenly see this craft come out of nowhere. It's because they are literally appearing within our dimension. The descriptions he goes on to talk about, he says there's nothing normal about these craft, and they don't operate by any science that we currently understand. Once again, that's not surprising. I've been given explanations before about how things work, and they went right over my head. Now, I don't claim to be Stephen Hawking or anybody like that, certainly, but I wouldn't be surprised if even our best scientists, were they given some of these explanations telepathically, whether they could even understand what was being done. Once again, imagine if we dropped one of our top-notch stealth fighters back in the year 1000 AD. what the heck would they do with it? I mean, because they wouldn't even know where to go with it, because they were so far inferior to our current science 1,000 years ago that they couldn't conceive of the materials that we use to construct this thing, and how light it was, yet it was so strong. And of course, trying to understand even our basic flight controls would be way over their heads. Now imagine us being in that kind of situation, and it may even be more than the equivalent of 1,000 years in disparity in science. He talks about a super secret group working on these problems, and they've improved physics models based on the observation or intelligence that most people aren't privy to. He mentions a scientific team. He references a Dr. Hal Puthoff and Dr. Eric Davis. And he says comments on these will be hard to find, because he says Google and Yahoo actively filter out these guys as part of a cover-up. And he says he's completely serious about that. Naturally, I would normally be a little concerned about that kind of statement, but let's face it, for a program as highly classified as this, all it would take would be a high-level presidential command or otherwise, and Google and Yahoo would trip over themselves to put in the proper deletion paperwork. They're not about fighting the deep state. They're about getting along with it and making their money. As far as the project code name, which he mentioned earlier, was Zodiac, he said that name may come out, it may not come out. When programs are compromised, what they usually do is deny them and then come up with a different name, and sometimes different personnel. So who knows what'll happen. Basically, he wrote this email because he wanted to offer some information that would help to support Grush. He's hoping that this information does become released, because the American people do have a right to know. He goes on to comment that Grush does have a certain level of safety due to his official position on the Congressional Task Force. So this reporting goes up the chain of command, right on up to the Inspector General and Congressional oversight. He says he, however, has no such protection, and that's why he was very careful about staying on the sidelines, because he wants to protect his family, himself, and his clearance. And if you want to lose your clearance, sending out emails like this, if you're caught, would definitely do it. Not to mention any other threats that could happen. Basically, the guy says, look, I got nothing to gain here, and he believes he has nothing to prove. He's not going to benefit from this in any way. He doesn't have a YouTube channel or anything else to profit by it. He wanted to offer his support as someone who took a loyalty oath to the USA, much like I did once upon a time. And he believes that, that humanity deserves to learn from these truths that should be released. And certainly all this money that's being devoted to these programs comes from the taxpayers. So we have a right to be aware of where billions of dollars, let's say, are being sent. So that was the email. The email itself, as I said, is gone. Luckily, I just copy and pasted it and put it in my notes, so I still have the actual phrasing from the email, and I was able to share it with you. Otherwise, I would have had to do it from memory. So draw whatever conclusions you'd like from this. Certainly everything that I've heard from this Grush and everything reading in this email seems to gel with what our understanding would be of what I've seen of gray technology and their cloning process and what have you. So I don't see anything so far. I haven't heard anything so far that would tell me that it's a psyop or that it's fake. But make your own decisions. Let me know what you think. If you have any questions or comments, I'd really like to read them. And as always, this is Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.